guilt and shame are different.
Let's talk about the difference. Yeah, guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. And that's the message that we can get with our behaviors if we haven't been allowed to express our feelings, been able to, like in my generation, I mean, so you just do as I say and done as I do, yes. Children to be seen, not heard, we just kind of shut it down. So we just start to interpret that as our identity is shame. And it's not like I did something wrong and I got the chance to work through it. I just stuffed it.
Right.
So that's the main difference.
I am excited to bring to you the 4th episode of the Fostering Collective podcast. My name is Steve Alberts. I'm the Church Engagement Specialist, and it is my honor to be able to be a part of this team and to be a part of being able to bring a resource like this to you as families and to churches. We want to be able to find ways to tell the story and also to equip. And so there's going to be a lot of different flavors of each episode, but right now I'm really excited to just jump in. We have Tiffany Davault. She's our trauma specialist here on staff at the Fostering Collective, and we're talking about shame. It's our monthly topic, and we have had a great interaction with it so far with our family collectives and others. And so just right now, get a piece of paper, get your notebook, get a pen, and let's just jump in together and learn all that we have about shame. Well, this is the 4th episode of our podcast, and right now we're together sitting with Tiffany Davault. Tiffany is been here for a long time. I'm going to let her say some things, and we are going to talk about your newest accomplishment. I know you don't want to.
No, I don't.
But we're going to talk about that. So, Tiffany, tell us a little bit about yourself, so that those that are listening, they probably know you very, very well. But just in case, what are some things we can...
Just in case, what do you want to know? Well, I don't even know where to start because...
So how about start with your family?
Okay, my family. I am married to David. We've been married for 33 years. I have to think about the year. Oh, it'll be 34 years in December. So
there we go.
Anyway, 33 years. We have 2 children. They were married and launched and have brought us grandbabies. So anyway, that's where I am in the early grandparent stage of life. We were married in 91 and we began fostering in 1995. We had our first little kiddo, maybe 96. We had her for 1 summer. We visited a children's home and didn't know that children didn't have parents, and so we were young 20s. And we're like, we're going to save the world. Yeah. We fostered that one little girl, and then I went into graduate school to do social work. To get my master's in social work. So that was 1997. We stopped fostering as do school. And as soon as I graduated, we moved into house parenting. So we were house parents in a children's home for a little over 2 years. We thought we would raise our children as house parents, and discovered how hard the house parent kids had it. It was hard because your parents were on duty 3 weeks out of the month. And for 1 week, you got your parents for yourself. And the rest of those other 3 weeks, you didn't. And you were kind of the bottom rung. And when kids were mad at your parents, they took it out on you. So we decided, I was in my 8th month of pregnancy, and one of the kids just had threatened to hit me so that I would miscarry because she was mad at my husband. I'm like, this is not really going to work. We decided to leave at that point, but knew that we would come back to fostering one day.
Right.
And one day it happened, and we were in Arkansas, and we had a couple of preteens at that time, and they wanted to foster. They knew our history with it, and we just were kind of waiting for the right time. And one day we all had the same, we heard somebody speak in church, and we're like, this is it. So we fostered teenagers because that's where our heart was. So.
Wow. So what was the gap between being a house parent and taking?
About 12 or 13 years.
Yeah. And so you have a master's degree in social work.
Yes.
Social work. And I want to ask you about your newest accomplishment.
Well, I decided, it took me a few years. I never did get my license because I went straight into house parenting, and there was not a time it just didn't need to do that. So that was one of those things, we'll put that aside and come back to it later. And later happened, I started thinking about it in 2020 when I had some free time, and then didn't do anything about it. But I finally took my licensure exam. in February and passed. So now I got my LMSW, so I'm licensed to, what that really means is I just have, it just shows there's a little bit more support behind my title, my name, what I do. It's there's more accountability. I have, you can trust it.
Well, so I appreciate your humility when it comes to that titles. I mean, all of us on staff, we don't cover ourselves with titles, but it does show. You're just right. It shows that there's some intentionality to what you do and some accountability to what you do, and I think it's important to put those
the
LMS. What is it?
Yeah, LMSW.
LMSW. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how that sounds when they say LMSW, but it's congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I finally will have to start turning all those continuing education things I do for actual credit. But.
Well, I bet you that's going to be another thing for you to be able to do, and also be able to have the families that work with us. They'll have an official title that they can.
Yeah, I think there's just a little more confidence that you could put in.
Yeah.
I'm still the same person, the same knowledge, but there's still that extra level of accountability.
Yep. The state recognizes some things that they wouldn't normally recognize. So that's fantastic. I'm glad that's part of our resources here now with everything. So wonderful. This month we're looking at this topic of shame, and you wrote some things. You wrote the handout. You wrote all the handouts, don't you?
Mostly.
For the most part. And so this month is dealing with shame, and I read your handout. And I loved it, partly because the way that you were able to delineate between shame and guilt, and also the aspect of shame and some of the I don't want to say positive parts of shame, but where shame there's an appropriate place for shame. Mostly talking about how it is destructive and stuff, but there's also some appropriateness to that, and I found that to be an interesting topic. So being able to talk with you about this, I think is pretty fantastic. I think listener, if you're struggling with shame in your family, I think this is going to be a place where you can pull out your notebook and write some things down, because I think it's going to be a pretty important topic. So looking at this idea of shame. So when you meet with families, what do they tell you? What's some of the things that they, if you can put it like in a category type of thing, when it comes to shame, what role does it play in some of the families that talk to you?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like it's kind of a sneaky thing. I don't think we necessarily see it as shame. We may not even realize that's what we're looking at. Yeah. I think there's expectations that families have, and then we build our lives around it without even realizing it. I can say, for instance, like this is my story, and I survived a car wreck when I was a baby, and my mom would say, if I did something wrong, God didn't save you for that. And so that was like I didn't interpret that as shame at that time, but that was meant to control my behavior, to bring me back into line. Well, I do believe shame can do that. When you've done something wrong, it's kind of like bumpers on the bowling alley. When you bumpers up, it keeps you in the path, but shame can drag you down. It's not. It's that guilt and what you do with it. But that shame would be heaped on me because I didn't have a sibling that survived. My dad didn't survive, but I did survive, and I made bad choices, and so that continued on. And so then that affects how I parented my children without realizing it, and how I interacted with my husband without realizing it. And so I think those kinds of things seep into they're woven through our history, through our life. And I think that sometimes when I'm talking with a family, and we're not really talking about that child's behavior in that moment or this year, we're talking about years of things that have built up to that point. Yeah, so I think that's it's a sneaky thing.
Wow, and you're even thinking, because I remember some times when we fostered in Arkansas, and there were times where we maybe said, or at least felt, saying, "We brought you into our home. You need to be a little more grateful," or whatever, and so you're right. It's the sneakiness of how what we're saying, and so So the families that you're talking to, some of them, when it comes to shame, this is part of where they're at with some of those expressions.
I think there's and this is totally just an observation. It could be, there's no research. I will say there is no research behind what I'm telling you right this moment. This is my observation. A lot of families that foster, a lot of families that adopt, a lot of families that foster and adopt out of foster care. There's an underlying, I feel like without doing the attachment work to really understand our attachment history, I feel like we are often trying to rewrite our own stories, and we do it through the children, and we think that that's going to help. And this is all unconscious.
Sure.
We're not like, I'm going to pick out a kid and I'm going to relive my life and it's going to be better. I don't think we are doing that, but I think there's that natural. We have a yearning to fix this, and we may not even know what we're trying to fix. And so I trained a family in Arkansas that was training. They were wanting to be a foster or an adoptive family, and I did the state required training. And they're sitting there, and they had lost a 10-year-old son, and they were wanting to adopt a 10-year-old son. And it was like you can see like the expectation is we're going to find this little boy and we're going to love him and we're going to hug him and he's just going to be healed. And I think it was really obvious in that moment. They were trying to seek to heal something in themselves. That was pretty obvious that they didn't see it. I could see it from the outside. And I think that it's a little, that happens sometimes. So we have these expectations that we set up for ourselves, for our kids, that we bring into our home.
And so you're talking about, or already mentioned some triggers, some things that you can, if you hear yourself saying this phrase, like you're talking about with you, when you're trying to get a behavior changed, and sometimes how you do that can put on some shame that you didn't intend to be there. Yeah. So what are can you think, I'm trying to think of some other triggers.
I could tell you things I heard growing up. Shame on you. Somebody that I know will still say that, shame on them.
Yeah.
Or it's a shame that they didn't.
Yeah.
And what you mean is, well, it's sad that they didn't follow through with that, but not, shame on them for not doing that. Or even little kids on the playground.
Yeah.
Shame, I know your name.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, yeah, right now I'm like, all I can hear is things I heard in childhood. So, yeah.
So you're trying to recover from that. And one of the things we were talking about just before we press record was this idea of, so you realize that there's shame, there's this shadow of shame that's inside of a relationship. And so to get that out or to deal with that, sometimes we talk about forgiveness. And some of the things that you mentioned about forgiveness is dealing with this idea of empathy. The role of forgiveness when it comes to shame. You mentioned, like, forgiveness means not choosing to hold someone's decisions or behaviors against them. Shame is identity-based, not decision or behavior-based. And I love, forgiveness doesn't even require reconciliation, much less empathy.
Forgiveness, like, especially when I grew up, probably our whole generation, was like you forgive, you say you're sorry, you forgive, you just move on, and we move on. Well, their family, you apologize. I don't even know if they had to worry about accepting it.
Right.
It was just, you just forgive. And that's what we are taught in church. I mean, that was kind of the very legalistic, we forgive 70 times.
Right.
But I think there was some I think that we were forced to make friends, make up.
Be friends.
Yeah, that's what good Christian families do. That's what you do because we're going to be Christ-like. I don't know that Christ was friends with everybody,
Right.
like we don't have that, but that's kind of the image that we got. And if we aren't doing that, then we're doing something wrong. I think that we don't develop empathy that way either. When I see kids being forced to give a hug, to hug and make up, they're not taught to think about it from the other person's perspective. And our kids that are coming with a trauma background, they don't have empathy. I mean, my kids do. We taught it to them early. It was kind of, we raised them with them, but they had a fairly easy pregnancy. We didn't have high stress infancy. Their first couple of years were moderately, there was some stress, but it wasn't something that we handed them, just this toxic stress.
Right.
So they entered the world without major trauma, and teaching them empathy was a whole lot easier. So I've got kids with tender hearts that are able to see the other person's perspective. Well, if they're always in self-protection mode, they're not going to see the empathy, they're not going to teach it, they're not going to learn it. We're going to teach compliance with our kids from hard places. I don't want to use that phrase, that have experienced trauma. We're going to teach compliance because they don't want to get in trouble. They want to avoid the consequence, but they're not learning empathy. And so reconciliation isn't even authentic. It's not real.
Right.
And so we're building like this false, and it just heaps on shame later.
So the implication then is when parents go, now forgive him or her,
And go play.
and go play, go play together nicely. And so now you're actually teaching an opposite, another concept of compliance, not forgiveness.
Compliance, yeah. And then they're learning that their opinions, their feelings weren't valued, that what they thought about the situation didn't matter. I mean, I've seen this play out in play groups. We get parents together, and the parents are just really wanting to have their time together to chit-chat, and the kids get an argument, and they just make up, it's Susie hurt my feelings. She said blah, blah, blah. I don't care. You just apologize, and you move on because we got our thing going on. I think there's a lot. You've got to step aside from whatever you're doing to teach these lessons.
Right.
But I think I caught myself doing it. I was raised without what that framework, what that looked like.
Well,
I'd much rather teach empathy, and it takes a longer process, and they may not ever be friends again. That's okay.
I think there's a lot what you're saying that matches kind of where I'm at too, is in that we try to mend things that don't need to be mended. I don't know, but it's so contrary to what we think a family should do. Well, I'm thinking even for us, for Shannon and I, we didn't force our kids to share. So if they didn't want to share, we didn't make them share. Now, we were hoping that they would share, and we guided them in things to share. But the lesson was more about we want you to share on your own, because if we make you share, you're not sharing. Same thing what you're talking about with forgiveness. If we make you forgive, it's not forgiven, it's compliance.
And we learn what forgiveness is a whole. It's just we teach something different than what it really is.
And when you have foster kids come in, their whole thing is about how to comply with things just to get things
to get
along. So we're trying to move past that compliance to teach.
We want to teach compassion. We want to teach what it's like to have those needs met, that felt safety, to feel like you belong. And when you're just having to do what you got to do to get by, you're not going to.
It seems like the $1 million book that needs to be written is how to foster and grow empathy in kids that are not your kids. Would that be?
Yeah, there may be a book out there.
I think we need to write one.
I think we've got bits and pieces in different books. Brene Brown is one of my favorites. She's not necessarily dealing with children, but talking about what the emotions are, the feelings, how shame comes to bear, and then Kurt Thompson.
Yeah. So you used a lot of Kurt Thompson's book, and you have the one on the desk right now.
That one saved my marriage.
That one, there's The Soul of Shame. Wow. And so, talk about some of the things. Well, let me just say, when you talked about this idea of forgiveness isn't oh boy, how did you say this? Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. Forgiveness isn't. See, this is where I'll edit some things out, right? So forgiveness means not choosing to hold someone's decisions or behaviors against them. Shame's identity-based, but not decision or behavior-based. It doesn't require reconciliation, much less empathy. So that was, I kind of sat back a little bit when I read that, not because I don't think that it's. I think it's just counterintuitive, especially the empathy part, because you think that forgiveness is what is going to foster or is going to grow empathy, and you're saying sometimes it doesn't.
Empathy comes first.
So where does that play out? How does that play out?
Well, I can tell you in personal relationship, when someone has wronged me, and there's a real reason, I have a justifiable reason to be pretty mad and hurt. When I can step back and look at how this person might have arrived at the decision they made or action they took, when I can see all the things that led up to that, there's that empathy that can build. I can see from his perspective, her perspective, what might have led to that rupture in our relationship. So then I can then choose to forgive.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes, and especially, I was raised in a Southern Baptist church. I mean, I was raised from the get-go in church, so I learned the scriptures. I learned, we learned to forgive, and often we just skipped all of the work and went straight to forgive that person for X, Y, or Z, whatever the offense was. You just forgive and you move on. Mm-hmm. And then you harbor, I think then you kind of that anger, the things that you didn't get to express about how you felt about something, it just kind of goes deeper inside of us, and we stifle that, and then anger builds. Yeah. And then all those other ugly emotions, not ugly emotions, I think all emotions have benefits,
right.
But those that then when they start to fester, they get pretty not attractive. Yeah. I guess they're ugly.
So even to where you say forgive, so you're talking to children or even adults, forgive, and then go play, go be best friends, go back to being friends. And you're saying that doesn't teach empathy, and that's not even real forgiveness. Not really.
I think that in the adult world, I mean, we kind of get along. We do what we need to do to get through the day. But with our kids, if we can teach them early, then they can have an adulthood that doesn't involve just getting along, just getting by. And when we can let each other express emotions, express feelings about how things felt. And with our kids, maybe we had the Get Along T-shirt and we made them sit in it together until they could get along. I don't know if that was a great idea or not, but
yeah, I've seen those pictures. They call it the
Get Along shirt. We would have them sit back to back until they could work out the same story if they were tattling on each other, but but they got to hear each other. I took myself out of that because they want to tattle, they want to tell, but they need to have their voices heard. And so I think when we shut them down and just say, oh, just go ask, go make it right, whatever that means in your family.
Right.
You go make that right. And sometimes it's just you ask for forgiveness, you apologize, whether you mean it or not. We didn't think through anything. We didn't look at it from the other person's perspective, but the day got to carry on.
Yeah.
It'll blow up later.
We've been talking a lot about shame, empathy, and forgiveness, and now we want to look at this idea of how does shame, how can families foster an environment that minimizes shame while producing open dialogue? So, and it comes from what you had just said about how do we share our own feelings, and how do we create this open dialogue, and maybe even kind of keep shame, keep that shadow of shame out of the conversation.
I think that we need to talk about when a wrong has been done. We have ruptures in relationship all the time, and I think there is we talk about guilt and shame, and we can be guilty if we've hurt somebody's feelings. We've done something wrong that's hurt someone. We need to bring that up. We can't brush it under the rug, because from experience, that has just caused big stumbling blocks later that we didn't see because it's invisible.
Right. And I'm going to pause real quick and just say, just in case someone wasn't listening to that part, guilt and shame are different.
Let's talk about the difference. Yeah, guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. And that's the message that we can get with our behaviors if we haven't been allowed to express our feelings, been able to, like in my generation, I mean, so you just do as I say and done as I do, yes. Children to be seen, not heard, we just kind of shut it down. So we just start to interpret that as our identity is shame. And it's not like I did something wrong and I got the chance to work through it. I just stuffed it.
Right.
So that's the main difference.
So guilt would be a family conflict. Let's say brother decided to break a toy, and that's objectively guilty. They're guilty of breaking the toy. Shame would be you're a bad person.
You're a bad kid
because you broke it, or you're bad because you didn't love your brother enough, or whatever. So
whatever label we're going to.
Yeah. So how do we navigate those feelings, and especially, and I think this is where you had put in the handout, where does shame play into it to say, okay, we want you to feel this. Tell us about that.
Well, if we're not feeling some things, if we don't feel guilty for things we've done, we've got a whole different issue. Right. We, and I don't make any diagnoses, but that is pretty serious if we're not feeling those emotions. Yeah. So the guilt, when we have that pang of guilt, you've done something wrong. The quicker that we can address it as parents, as caregivers, to draw it out, to talk about it, I think it's just that curiosity. What was going on when you did that? Not how could you?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
What led to that? Just tell me more. And I think the more that a child gets to tell what was happening, it starts to make sense. Even as they say it out loud, they might hear it themselves. But when we can listen without getting offensive or defensive while they're sharing, I think curiosity is big. What's going on? There's usually, every behavior in my book has a positive intention behind it. So why little Johnny broke the toy, let's find out what was going on. There's a need. His voice is his behavior at that point. So we want to let him be heard, and I think so many times we can just shut it down because, one, it takes a lot of time, and things never happen at a convenient time.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was just picturing that because sometimes Johnny breaks the toy just before we're going to church, right? And you don't have so being able to it's possible to put a pin in it.
It's possible.
And then talk about it after church.
Putting a pin in it makes me nervous. I even still, someone can say, I want to talk to you about this later. And I'm going to be like, oh. Yeah. So I don't know. I think the sooner that we can handle it, the better. It could be that, like, this is a totally pretend scenario, but let's say Johnny broke the toy before going to church. What was going on? Maybe there's something at church that he's afraid of. Maybe there's some reason he doesn't want to be at church. Maybe he does. Maybe he's feeling shamed when he goes to church and he knows he doesn't like that feeling. Like kids will act out just to avoid whatever's the next thing. So that's a possibility. And I think when we can be curious about maybe something happens every Sunday before it's time to go to church, and we start blaming this kid for the behaviors, and it starts to build up because he always picks the worst times. It's always when we go to church. Well, what at church is a problem for him potentially. So I don't know. I think we can miss some things that then it's just gonna fold over into shame.
Right. And as you were talking, I was kind of picturing that moment. There's if you are flexible, I had a mentor say when crisis happens, the worst thing you can do is panic, because when you panic, you pull all your emotions tight, and it takes a long time to undo. So if you just stay relaxed and stay focused on the goal, then you can't. Then it doesn't. You let God kind of unravel the emotions. So I'm going to try to put an idea, and you tell me whether it's right or wrong, or good, helpful or not helpful. Helpful or not helpful. So Johnny breaks the toy before church. One, you don't have to be. You can be late to church. It's okay.
What? Not in my household. Well, like in my household now, yes, I'm late everywhere.
Yeah. So it's okay to adjust your time schedule, or you rearrange seats in the car to say, okay, Johnny's going to sit next to me. We're going to talk about it while we're going to church. We're talking about it while we're walking into church, I love the curiosity. That key. I'm going to call it a key. If you just stay curious instead of being monologue-y, then you're giving them that control of being able to share their emotions.
To feel heard.
What's the chances of them being more honest with their sharing it in that time of curiosity? I imagine you get more honest answers.
I'm sure.
So,
I mean, since our little Johnny is fictitious, I could say, he was going to open it.
Yeah, right.
But he will be. He will give some better clues about what's going on, and it gives you more things to work with than even if you say we're going to talk about this when we get home, by the time you get home, he's going to either A, will have forgotten what even prompted it, B, he will have stuffed it further, C, he's going to act out even more. I don't know.
You use the word clue. So you're not looking, you may not be getting answers, but you may be getting some clues.
Yeah, depending on the age of the kids, you'll and just the cognitive abilities, you're going to get different things. But in your relationship, I think, in the end, especially with caring for these kids that have experienced trauma, and really all of our children, relationship is number one. At the end of the day, that's what we have left.
Yeah,
is the relationship. All the other stuff, being on time for church, our image that we have as a proper family, sometimes we have to let that stuff go so that we can attend to the relationship that's right in front of us.
Right.
So.
And again, I think that applies to bio kids. It applies to families that don't have foster care.
People.
Maybe even marriage advice.
Oh yeah.
I'm looking at your book. Let's see if we can talk about this book.
Yeah.
I love the title of it, "The Soul of Shame."
Yep.
So tell us what you see. What importance is that?
Man, well, to me, it's a very personally important book. It's funny. I bought it at. If you're familiar with CAFO, which is this Christian Alliance for the Orphan, that is an annual gathering. Yeah. The word just escaped me. But Kurt Thompson was the keynote speaker, and this would have been years ago. And I heard him speak. I'm like, oh, that book. It was his new book. I'm going to buy it. This is going to be great. And so I opened it up, and that was, he's pretty wordy. He's a smart guy, and he uses big words. I'm like, well, I'm going to put this aside, and I'll come back to it for an easy read later. And the following year, at a time when I desperately needed to hear the message in this book, I read the book. And it was one that I read out loud because I have to stay with it because it was a lot of words that I had to really process. But man, it was the biggest blessing in my family as we read this book together, and it made an impact. And even understanding how our childhoods affect us, and the shame that we carry. And he refers to a shame attendant, like I pictured like the angel and the devil, but I've got the shame attendant that's always here telling me what sins I did to help cover up for those things that I didn't want to deal with, and the shame that was heaped on. And that shame is just always there trying to keep us down. And I having that visual, and he gave me that in here. But he talks about the brain and how all the smart stuff. Yeah. But I'm
reaching for it. I want to.
Do you want that? You want to touch the book?
I want to hold the book. When I look at books, I'm one of those real book people. So go to a bookstore. The table of contents. So I'm just going to look at the table of contents real quick. So looking here, how shame targets the mind. Oh wow. How joy, shame in the brain. That's what you're just talking about. Shame in the biblical narrative. I think I'm going to read that chapter for sure. Shame's remedy, vulnerability. I saw you mentioned something about that. The antidote to.
The antidote to shame is empathy.
The antidote to shame is empathy, not forgiveness. Okay, we're going to talk about that. The antidote. So, redeeming shame in our nurturing communities. That's another chapter. And renewing the healing cloud of witnesses. Hebrews 12:1-2. That's my favorite verse. So this is a great book. So it's Kurt Thompson with a C. Kurt Thompson. The Soul of Shame, retelling the stories we believe about ourselves.
And if you're a podcast listener, which if you're listening to this, you probably are, he has season 4 of Being Known podcast is all about this book about shame. It breaks it down. If you're not going to read it,
we'll try to put this in the notes for.
It's my favorite.
It's your favorite book and favorite podcast too.
Yeah, and the next year I heard him at CAFO again. I sat like a fangirl sitting right there listening to him. He's like noticed. I was like, I hope I didn't creep him out. But
I have my own. Paul David Tripp is my guy. So I want his mustache, but just not possible to grow his mustache for sure. Yeah. But so empathy. I'm reading your words here. Empathy drives out shame, not forgiveness.
Yeah, I love Brené Brown is another one of my favorites, and she talks about, and she has a quote. I will butcher it if I try, but she talks about shame being the petri dish. Like if you just I forgot what she tossed in there and it makes it worse. But if you drop in empathy, it's going to break it up. And so I picture being in science when you put something in the petri dish that breaks things apart. I can see that's going to bust it out. It's like light breaking the darkness. It's that empathy. It can't live with shame. So when we can offer empathy to ourselves, I think that's where we have to start as caregivers. Yeah. Offering that empathy to ourselves for our childhoods, for the things that we brought into our marriages, the things we brought into parenting our kids. How I can think of some of the mistakes I made. I'm like, well, boy, what was I thinking? But I can look back and give myself some empathy, understanding how that 28-year-old Tiffany did whatever that was, because she wasn't thinking about some things. But there's just not room for shame when you can empathize, and that's when true forgiveness and true healing, I think, can come in. Wow. If anybody was at our family collective this last month, Keely Burks did a talk on shame, and she talked about, if we expect, we hope, I think that we want to bring these kids in our home and we're going to move them 180 degrees from one direction to the next. And really in this generation, we may get them 25 degrees. Yeah. We may get them, if we're lucky, 45 degrees, or maybe 90. I don't know. We don't know. They're probably not going to make it 180 degrees where we would envision that. So I'm like, if I've got a child that is diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder and we move them from here to, here I'm holding my hands, it's maybe 45 degree angle, maybe we've got some success, and their next generation, they'll be able to teach them. They can have the nurturing skills. They've done it. We've watched, we've taught.
So maybe that's one of the things that parents, as you're listening to this, you're not responsible. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're not responsible for healing 100% of these kids. But if you can move them just a little bit down the road while they're with you, if you're fostering, then you just have a short amount of time. If you can move that dial just a little bit, that's success.
Well, and even, when you think you use the word responsible, and I'm like, are we even responsible? I mean, God has given, these are God's kids. Yeah. He has called us to care for them. He's going to do the healing. He's going to do the work. I think our responsibility lies in saying yes. Yeah. Listening to him, to opening our homes, to taking the next step. But he's going to do that work, and we can step back. And I heard it said just a couple of times over the last couple of months. We're not responsible for writing our kids' testimonies. We are not. This is God's, and so we're here for whatever part of the journey. We fostered teenagers, and the longest term one we had was 2.5 years. We might have moved the connection dial between her and my husband. If we had a scale of 0 to 100, maybe it went from 0 to 5, and that was a huge success because she didn't trust men. And there were some things but that wasn't our responsibility. We just had to offer the opportunities, I think, and then share what we have. If we're sharing the full love of Christ with this young lady, some of it's going to sink in, and it's not our job to make it grow. Yeah. We just offer it.
Yeah. So again, going back to if we put on the responsibility for healing and let that go.
Yeah, because when we don't see it happen like we think it should happen, then what do we turn into? We heap shame on ourselves for not. And I think one of the words you said earlier, one of those things that you listen for, should is a big one that when I hear should in a sentence, I should have been able to.
Oh yeah.
They should have been able. I was a music major before I went into social work. I went 3 years in music education. I loved music. It came naturally to me, but I had some struggles with sight singing, and it was a struggle. So I'm in one of my juries, and I had to sight sing this song, this piece, this line for, I don't know. I would turn around, I'd practice it in my head, and I would sing it out loud because I had to, but then I would turn around and sing it for the judges, and I would mess it up. Yep. I messed it up 3 times in a row, but they heard me do it right. But then when I turned and faced them, I did it wrong. I did not pass this jury. And that's fine. I can handle the failure. But my teacher, my choir director's like, we just didn't expect that of you. Oh, and I was like, oh, no. Oh. And, of course, my husband passed his, and that wasn't good for me. So I took a semester off of, well, not off school, but off of, I think I could find a new major because this is not fun anymore. And then we're social.
You said that, and I can hear myself say that.
I didn't expect that of you. That's like comparing me to every other student they've ever had, and I didn't stack up. So I think that we do that, and he didn't mean it in a shameful way. Yeah. Or you should have been able to do that. We heard you. yeah, I should have been able to do that. I did it right. I should have been able to turn around. And so then I'd like start telling a story about myself to myself. That's wrong.
And I would also think that in my own experience, where we've realized we've done something, like we've put some shame onto our kids in our house or our spouse or whatever relationship, we can go back and heal it. And go back and.
That's the beauty of, not the beauty of rupture, but we all have ruptures every day, every relationship. We have these ruptures. We make mistakes. And I think where the learning comes, and I think this is where what moved the dial with one of our girls, was the ability to hear, especially someone who didn't trust men, to have a man come back and say, I did that wrong. I'd like to do it. Can I have a do-over? I didn't like the way that I treated you or the way I said whatever. Can I do this again? Yeah. And just to apologize and to get that chance to practice doing it right in a relationship with each other, then we can repair that. And I think that's where the healing is. And then if she chooses to forgive, we've given her the option. It's on her, and we're not making her. We're not making her get along with anybody.
Yep.
But when she can see in humility, gosh, I messed up. I didn't like the way I did that.
Yeah. Wow. I remember hearing a quote in a TV show, and I forget what TV show it was. This Is Us, maybe. That sounds like something. Right. It's a brutal show. But where it was, the dad said, "Can I do this again? Can you give me another chance to do this?" And I thought, wow, what a cool thing. On a totally adjacent note, I remember coming in for a handshake with another guy, and he grabbed too soon, and he grabbed my fingers, and you kind of do that
awkward,
that little awkward handshake, and that happened, and he grabbed my hand, and then he let go, and then put his hand back into my hand appropriately for a good handshake, and I was like, oh, you can do that, you can change the handshake, take control, and just go, you know what, I made a mistake, I said something wrong, and I shouldn't have. And it's going to take a while. I understand it might take a while for you to get past that, what I said, but I'm going to make it right. And again, does that teach empathy?
Yeah. Well, especially when you can express, I think empathy, especially for those that have hard time seeing someone else's perspective, when they can say, oh, when I said that to you, that made me feel. The more words that we can describe what we were feeling in that moment, and then when we ask to do that again, that can help teach that. We're going to, they're not going to, you may not see the results, the full benefit of what you're doing with your 5, 6, 10, 12-year-old until they're 50. I mean, I don't know. That's not, like I said, it's not our story to write. That's their story. God's got it. We're just doing our part. And I think the more informed we are on how to not make it worse, as far as heaping shame upon shame, help them identify what those feelings are in themselves, and then they can start to dig that out.
So we've really covered a lot of gamut, and I know that there's so much more.
There's a lot.
Right? How many books do you have? On your bookshelf dealing with just shame. So what we'll do is we'll put the show notes for The Soul of Shame, and then we'll put in the somehow you can download the
Being Known podcast.
Yeah, the Being Known podcast, and also your sheet that you made for families.
Yep.
And then if you are a foster family connected with what we do, we're going to cover shame in every. So all our dad collectives we're going to cover shame, our mom collectives, our family collectives we're going to cover. We already covered shame. Yeah. So it's going to be about how to handle and heal shame. Tiffany, thank you so much. I've learned a lot just by doing this, and I know that families have, and they'll just continue this month. So stay plugged in, families. Don't retreat. Shame is something that happens. It's a disruption in a relationship, but they can be healed. Just stay engaged, and when you see our emails come across, registrations come across. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about our registration here in just a second. But Tiffany, thank you so much for this time.